What happens when authority is wielded with arrogance rather than responsibility? Imagine an ordinary day taking a shocking turn when a senior black army officer becomes the target of a racist policewoman's prejudice. What unfolds next is a clash that stuns a crowd, turns the tables, and delivers a lesson that no one will ever forget. Before we continue, hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell to stay updated with timeless stories like this one. It was a crisp Saturday morning in the heart of Atlanta, Georgia. The sprawling Liberty Market buzzed with activity as vendors sold fresh produce, baked goods, and handmade crafts. Among the crowd was Major General Marcus Bennett, a decorated Army officer who was close to retirement. Dressed casually in a navy polo shirt, khaki pants, and simple sneakers, he seemed to have blended effortlessly with the other shoppers, many of whom had no idea they were in the presence of a decorated national hero. Known for his humility and sharp intellect, Marcus had spent decades leading soldiers through some of the most challenging operations overseas. But today, he wasn't Major General Bennett, he was just Marcus, who was simply enjoying the chance to browse quietly for his favorite local honey and a few fresh vegetables. As Marcus scanned a vendor's display, a commotion erupted near the parking lot. Officer Lillian Whitman, a newly promoted sergeant with the Atlanta Police Department, stood by a parked vehicle. Her stance was rigid and her expression stern. Lillian was infamous in her department for her aggressive outlook and quick temper. She had earned her stripes not through teamwork or empathy but by simply imposing her authority wherever she found herself. On this faithful day, Lillian was issuing a parking ticket to a man who had unknowingly parked in a restricted zone. The man, an elderly gentleman in his 70s, pleaded with her to reconsider, as he explained that he hadn't seen the sign earlier. Instead of responding with understanding, Lillian dismissed his words with a scoff and issued the fine, her posture radiating impatience. Marcus, who was standing nearby, noticed the exchange. His military training had instilled in him an acute awareness of his surroundings, and Lillian's harsh attitude immediately caught his attention. He watched as the elderly man, who was clearly distressed, attempted to pick up his groceries from the ground where they had fallen in the rush. Lillian, however, turned on her heel, making no effort to assist. The tension between Marcus's sense of duty and his desire to stay indifferent was palpable. He had spent his career upholding principles of respect and accountability, in this moment, though seemingly minor, demanded his immediate intervention. Taking a deep breath, Marcus approached Lillian. "Excuse me, officer," he said calmly, his tone was steady but firm. "I think it would be fair to consider the circumstances before issuing that ticket." Lillian barely glanced at him. "Mind your business," she snapped, her voice laced with irritation. "This doesn't concern you." The interaction, which was though brief, was enough to ignite a subtle tension in the air. All the shoppers nearby began to take notice of what was happening, some pausing to observe what appeared to be the beginnings of a confrontation. Marcus took a step closer, his calm composure unshaken. "I believe it concerns everyone when fairness and respect are ignored," he said. That man wasn't being reckless. He made a simple mistake. Lillian's eyes narrowed as she turned fully to face him. "Are you questioning my authority?" she demanded, with her voice rising. "No," Marcus replied again. "I'm only questioning your judgment." This response of his, which was delivered with quiet conviction, caught Lillian off guard. This was because she had been used to people either backing down or reacting to her with anger. Marcus did neither. Instead, he held her gaze, as his presence was commanding without being aggressive. But Lillian wasn't one to back down either. "Listen, mister," she said, stepping closer, her tone dripping with condescension. "I don't know who you think you are, but I've been doing this job long enough to know how to handle situations like this." Marcus, still standing his ground, replied, "And I've been serving this country long enough to know the importance of treating people with dignity, no matter their circumstances." A murmur spread through the crowd. By now, several people had gathered to watch what was happening as their curiosity kept growing by the exchange. Phones began to appear, as their cameras secretly began to record. Lillian's frustration mounted as she noticed the growing audience. Her authority was beginning to feel challenged, and she couldn't stand the idea of being undermined in public. "You don't have the right to tell me how to do my job," she yelled. Marcus tilted his head slightly, his voice calm yet cutting. "Actually, I do. As a citizen, it's my duty to ensure that those in power use it responsibly." The crowd's murmurs grew much louder, which was a mix of surprise and agreement. Lillian, who was now visibly flustered, crossed her arms. "If you don't back off," she said, "you're going to find yourself in trouble." Marcus didn't flinch. "Trouble?" he asked. "For standing up for what's right." His words hung in the air, as their weight was undeniable. The surrounding shoppers, who were once silent observers, began to whisper among themselves, as their voices carried a note of admiration for Marcus's calm defiance. Lillian was not moved. Instead, she reached for her radio, as her intention was to escalate the situation. "You leave me no choice," she said with a cold tone. But Marcus stood his ground. He wasn't a man who was easily intimidated, and his unwavering stance sent a clear message to everyone present: this was about more than a parking ticket. It was about accountability, respect, and the fundamental principles of justice. The confrontation had begun, and the stakes were about to rise. The tension in the parking lot was increasing as Officer Lillian Whitman's hand hovered over her radio. Marcus Bennett, who was still standing tall and unwavering, met her gaze with a much calm resolve. The crowd, now numbering close to 30, had grown silent, as their anticipation continued building up. The soft hum of traffic and the distant voices of vendors provided the only backdrop to the heated exchange. Marcus took a couple of steps forward, careful to avoid any sudden movements that could escalate the situation further. "Officer," he began, his voice steady and deliberate, "it's not about questioning your authority. It's about holding ourselves to a higher standard, especially when we're entrusted with serving the public." Lillian's eyes flashed with irritation. "Don't lecture me," she told Marcus, her words filled with disdain. "You think you know what it's like out here? You don't. I have to deal with rule breakers and liars every single day." "And yet," Marcus replied, his tone unyielding but not confrontational, "it's in moments like these that your true character is tested. Anyone can wear a uniform, but earning respect requires something more, which is accountability." The crowd's murmur grew louder, a few audible comments of support for Marcus cutting through the air. Lillian's posture became more stiff, as her frustration was now evident in her body language and clenched jaw. "You don't get to tell me about accountability," she retorted, taking a step closer to Marcus. "You're just another guy who thinks he knows better because he read something in a book or saw it on TV." Marcus let her words hang in the air for a moment before responding. "I don't need to read it in a book. I've lived it," he said in simple terms, his words carrying the weight of several decades of service. The simplicity of his statement hit harder than any long-form rebuttal could have. Lillian hesitated for a split second, her bravado was growing faint as she struggled to maintain control of the narrative. She glanced at the crowd, majority of whom now seemed to lean toward Marcus's side. Desperate to regain the upper hand, Lillian crossed her arms and smirked. "You talk about a big game, but you don't know me. I've been on this job long enough to recognize when someone's trying to make me look bad. You think you're better than me? What makes you so special?" Marcus didn't rise to the bait. Instead, he took a deep breath and spoke with a quiet authority that commanded attention. "What makes me special isn't important," he said. "What matters is how we treat others. That's the legacy we leave behind." The crowd erupted in quiet agreement with polite claps, murmured affirmations, and nods of approval rippling through the bystanders. Lillian's face became visibly red as she felt the tide turning against her. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her tone was now defensive but noticeably less confident. "To let him off the hook. To let people like you tell me how to do my job." "I want nothing but fairness," Marcus said. "Fairness for that man, fairness for you, and fairness for everyone watching. Because if we can't expect that from each other, then what hope do we have for justice? Lillian's hold on her authority seemed to weaken with each passing second she stood there. The crowd, who were now actively recording with their phones, had become witnesses to something much larger than a mere disagreement. The standoff had transformed into a public clash between principle and arrogance, between accountability and unchecked power. Lillian's frustration boiled over. "Enough of this," she barked, pulling out her citation pad as if to reassert her dominance. "You think you're untouchable? Let's see how you feel when." "Officer Whitman," Marcus interrupted, his voice still calm but more firm this time, "before you write another word, I suggest you consider who you're speaking to." Lillian froze mid-motion, as confusion flickered across her face. "What's that supposed to mean?" Marcus reached into his pocket slowly, ensuring his movements were deliberate and non-threatening. He pulled out his military ID, holding it out for her to see. The card glinted under the midday sun, as its official seal was unmistakable by any means. "My name is Major General Marcus Bennett," he said, his tone steady but piercing. "I have served this country for over 4 decades. I've led soldiers into many battlefields, negotiated peace talks, and upheld the principles of justice you seem to have forgotten today." The effect of what he said was immediate, as a wave of astonishment swept through the crowd. Whispers of, "Did he say Major General?" and "No way, that's a high-ranking officer," spread like wildfire among the growing audience. Lillian's face turned pale as the realization of what he just said sank in. Her hand, still holding the citation pad, trembled slightly. You're military," she stammered, her voice losing its earlier sharp edge. "I am," Marcus confirmed. "And as someone who has dedicated his life to protecting the freedoms we all enjoy, I can't stand by and watch those freedoms be trampled by arrogance or prejudice." The crowd, who were now encouraged by Marcus's words, erupted into cheers and applause. The noise seemed to further straighten out Lillian's composure. She glanced nervously at the bystanders, as her confidence eroded with each passing second. One bystander stepped forward, with his phone in hand. "You've got some explaining to do, officer," the man said, his tone sharp. "That's a decorated officer you're disrespecting." Lillian's eyes moved around, searching for an escape from the situation that was spiraling out of her control. "I didn't know," she muttered defensively. "How was I supposed to?" "It doesn't matter if you knew," Marcus interrupted, as his tone remained firm but not unkind. "What matters is that you acted without respect or accountability. That has consequences, no matter who the other person is." Another voice from the crowd chimed in. "Yeah, and we've got it all on video." Lillian's head snapped toward the group of people holding their phones towards her, with their cameras capturing every detail. The weight of public scrutiny settled heavily on her shoulders, and for the first time, a sense of genuine fear became visible in her eyes. Marcus stepped back slightly, giving her space but maintaining his composed manner. "Officer Whitman," he said, his voice calm but resolute, "this isn't just about today. It's about the example we set for others. You've been given authority, but that doesn't make you immune to accountability." The crowd nodded in agreement, their murmurs now a steady hum of support for Marcus. Lillian, who was now cornered and visibly shaken, looked down at her feet. The bravado she had carried moments earlier was now a distant memory. At that moment, the sound of approaching sirens filled the air, as the area had received multiple calls from witnesses who were reporting the incident, and 2 squad cars rolled into the parking lot. The stage was set for what would come next. And justice was about to arrive as the balance of power had irrevocably. The shrill wail of sirens filled the parking lot, drawing the attention of every onlooker. 2 patrol cars screeched to a halt near the scene, and a pair of officers stepped out, their faces reflecting the seriousness of the situation. The crowd parted to let them through, their murmurs became silent in anticipation of what would unfold. One of the officers, Lieutenant Sarah Daniels, no-nonsense leader respected for her integrity and fairness, was a well-known figure in the neighborhood. She had received multiple calls about the incident, each one painting a troubling picture of Officer Lillian Whitman's behavior. "Officer Whitman," Daniels began, her tone sharp and authoritative, "what exactly is going on here?" Lillian straightened up immediately in her attempt to regain composure that was painfully obvious. "Lieutenant, this is just a misunderstanding," she said quickly as her words tumbled out in a confused rush. "This man," she gestured toward Marcus, "was interfering with my duties." Daniels raised an eyebrow and turned to Marcus, who stood calm and collected. "Is that so?" "No, ma'am," Marcus replied. "I intervened when I saw Officer Whitman treating an elderly man unfairly. I spoke up because I believe in accountability, something every public servant should uphold." Daniels nodded as her sharp eyes scanned the scene. "And what happened next?" Marcus explained the events in a brief and detailed manner, omitting any dramatics but ensuring the key details were clear. Officer Lillian, who was now visibly nervous, interrupted multiple times, but her attempts to downplay her actions only added to the growing skepticism of the crowd. Lieutenant Daniels, who was now holding a video recording from one of the bystanders, watched the footage with a very serious expression. The camera didn't lie, it showed Lillian's dismissive attitude, her hostile remarks, and her attempts to intimidate Marcus. "This behavior is unacceptable," Daniels said, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. She turned to Lillian with an unrelenting gaze. "You've not only abused your authority but you have also disrespected a senior military officer and a civilian. This is a disgrace to the uniform you wear." Lillian's mouth opened to protest, but Daniels raised a hand to silence her. "I don't want to hear excuses. Your actions have been documented, and they will be thoroughly investigated. For now, hand over your badge and weapon." Her hands trembled as she released her badge and handed over her firearm to her supervisor. The weight of public accountability bore down on her, and for the first time, her arrogance gave way to a look of genuine regret. Daniels turned to Marcus with a softening tone. "Major General Bennett, I deeply apologize for what you've endured today. Your actions exemplify the integrity we all should strive for." Marcus nodded. "Thank you, Lieutenant. My goal wasn't to create a spectacle but to remind us of all of the responsibilities we carry." Daniels addressed the crowd next, her voice ringing with authority. "This incident will not go unchecked. As public servants, we are held to the highest standards, and behavior like this will not be tolerated." News of the incident spread rapidly, and by the following morning, the videos recorded by witnesses went viral, and began a nationwide conversation about ethics and responsibility in law enforcement. Headlines such as "Rogue Cop Disgraced by Decorated Army Officer" dominated social media and news outlets. Lillian Whitman's suspension was swift and decisive, as an internal review panel was convened to investigate her behavior, and public opinion weighed heavily against her. Former colleagues who had once supported her, distanced themselves and was unwilling to associate with someone whose actions had tarnished their department's reputation. Meanwhile, Marcus Bennett became an unexpected hero. His calm manner, appearance and unwavering commitment to justice sat deeply with everyone across the country. Messages of support poured in from thousands of civilians, veterans, and active military personnel like himself. The local leaders, who were inspired by the incident, began calling for reforms. This led to the organization of town hall meetings to discuss accountability and ethics among personnel in public service. Marcus was invited to speak at several events, where he emphasized the importance of respect, fairness, and the courage to stand up against wrongdoing. "This isn't about me," Marcus often said in his speeches. "It's about the values we share as a society. If we don't hold ourselves accountable, we fail not just as individuals but as a community." Under public pressure, the police department also implemented mandatory training programs that were focused on de-escalation, ethics, and proper community engagement. Lillian's actions became a case study in what not to do, serving as a strong reminder of the consequences of an unchecked authority. Months later, Marcus Bennett stood on the stage of a packed auditorium, addressing a diverse audience of law enforcement officers, community leaders, and civilians. Behind him, a banner read, "Integrity in Action, Building Trust Through Accountability." "This isn't about a single event," Marcus said. "It's about the legacy we choose to leave behind. Do we stand up for what's right, even when it's uncomfortable? Do we treat others with respect, regardless of their rank, status, or background? These are the questions we must ask ourselves every day." The audience stood up to applause, as their admiration for Marcus became more evident. For Marcus, the incident in the parking lot wasn't about personal recognition. It was a moment that reinforced his lifelong belief that integrity and courage are the cornerstones of leadership. Lillian Whitman, on the other hand, faded into obscurity. Stripped of her badge and shunned by her community, she struggled to rebuild her life, as the weight of her actions served as a constant reminder of the importance of humility and responsibility. In his quiet moments, Marcus reflected on the day that had changed so much. He didn't see himself as a hero, he saw himself as just a man who had done what was right. What would you have done in Marcus's position? Do you think justice was served? Let us know your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that inspire change and action. See you in the next video.